Hello and welcome back to What's Millie Making, where I am Millie, and this is a space where we talk about the past, present, and future of my making, mostly knitting. Today's video is Knitting Podcast episode 17. I have zero sewing, despite my meager efforts. Maybe I'll talk about that at the end of the video, but I do have a decent amount of knitting. I have 3 finished objects and 3 works in progress. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into finished objects. And I'm wearing my first finished object. It is the Soul Top by Rose Knitwear. You can purchase this pattern individually, and it is also included in the Rose Knitwear book, which I checked out from my local library, so I got the pattern for free. So this is a bottom-up construction top. You basically join in the round, you knit the body, you separate for the front yoke and the back yoke, finish that up, and then you add on some strap. Fairly straightforward construction. The back yoke and the front yoke are exactly the same, like there's no different shaping for the front versus the back. And usually I don't love bottom-up construction. However, this one starts off really easy. I literally just did a long tail cast-on, joined in the round, and then knit a bunch of stockinette in the round. So I don't usually love bottom-up construction. The start was so easy, and I really wanted a mindless stockinette project that it was just kind of perfect timing. Now, the fit of this top, I did have to make some modifications, but before I get into that, I'm going to rehash some of my gripes I have with this pattern. I think I talked about it in my late summer knitting plans video, but I might have not. So apologies if I'm just purely regurgitating previously said feelings. So the way that the sizing works in all the patterns in the book, at the end of the book, there's a size chart and it tells you if your bust circumference is X to Y, then pick this coordinating size Z. And that is well and dandy if you don't have a huge difference between your upper bust circumference and your full bust circumference. It's fine if you are knitting something with a lot of positive ease and the sizing is a little bit more flexible. However, it is a little bit more difficult when you are knitting something more close fitting, such as this tank top. So I wish that the pattern designer had said, hey, this is the amount of recommended negative ease, and this is how much negative ease there is in this sample. It would have made picking a size much easier, in my opinion. So I cast this sweater on like 2 or 3 times because I kept on picking a size that was too big, and that is my next problem, but it's not a problem with the pattern, but rather something I've just learned for myself. The reason why it was turning out so big is because I have a significant difference between my full bust circumference and my waist measurement. So I was picking a size based on my full bust circumference, and the body of the sweater is just knit straight. There's no shaping involved. So naturally it was going to be very loose around the waist. So instead I knew I gauged for my multiple cast-ons because I knit a few inches like before I ripped it out each time. Maybe not a few inches, maybe like 1 or 2 inches. And I ultimately cast on a number of stitches that would give me anywhere from -1 to +1 inches of ease, because I knew my gauge, but I didn't wet block what I had knit. And I feel like cotton, you can really stretch it out if you want to, so that's why my gauge is a little bit flexible. So I picked that stitch count and then I knit in the round until I reached the point where it was under my bust. I forget how many inches that was. And then I started doing some very simple bust shaping along both sides of the body to get a circumference that would then be anywhere from -1 to +1 positive ease around my full bust. And then I knit the yoke. This did work out pretty well. At first I was a little bit concerned. Before I blocked it, the way that it was fitting, I felt like I could still see the fabric distorting a bit around my bust, which is what I wanted to avoid. I don't really like when you have a looser knit fabric and I can very obviously see it stretching out across my bust. I want the fabric to look relatively uniform. I'm not saying it's 100% uniform, but after blocking, it definitely sits a lot better versus before blocking. And I've just come to realize now that if I want to knit this sort of close-fitting garment, I need to pick a pattern that has some bust shaping involved, or I have to figure out how to add bust shaping myself. So I would knit this pattern again, and I would honestly do the same sort of bust shaping I did because I think I'm like pretty happy with the fit. It's comfortable. I like where the armhole sits. I feel like a common complaint with summer tees or summer tanks is that the armhole is either too high or too low, and mine sits at like the perfect spot where it's like sitting about like an inch above my bra, but it's not like digging into my underarm or anything like that. And I'm not the biggest fan of summer fiber, so if I were to knit this again, I think I really like the scrappy versions that some people have knit with different wool yarn. So I think if I were to knit it again, I could see myself knitting a scrappy wool version. Or maybe I'll decide that I really enjoy wearing this and knit another summer version. Who knows? Don't hold me to anything. Overall, I would say it's a fairly straightforward pattern to follow. I would recommend it. If you have a very large bust or you have variable measurements for like your upper bust, your full bust, and your waist, you might have to do some math and some shaping to figure things out. Oh, I forgot to say that another modification I did is I knit the front yoke a little bit higher. So there's a point in the yoke where you are working decreases to shape the arms, and I just slowed down the decrease rate on the front because I wanted the front to sit a little bit higher than the back, because I knit the back first and I was like, oh, I don't know if this is going to sit too low on me, but it ended up working out fine. I think then ultimately I did have to adjust my strap length as well. But those notes are in my Ravelry project page if you are curious and you want to knit the pattern as well. I think those are all my thoughts on the pattern. Let's talk about the yarn. So the yarn that I used for this pattern is the Barocco Vera yarn, which is an 80% cotton yarn and 20% viscose yarn. I did win this yarn as a prize during the New Jersey Wool Walk, so my total project cost for this tank top is $0. $0 for the yarn and $0 for the pattern, which is nice. All that said, I don't think I would repurchase this yarn. It was perfectly nice to knit with. It has a chainette construction, and I did feel like sometimes when I was knitting it, my needle would kind of poke the yarn and pull out a strand. But I noticed that when I blocked it, because I did not like rip any of those strands, it all settled down into the fabric. So I didn't have like some weird loose strings or anything like that. And because I am a looser knitter now, I didn't find myself getting the same sort of hand cramps that I would get in the past when I would knit with plant fibers. The reason I don't think I would repurchase this yarn is one, it is quite pricey. It's $26 for 100 grams of yarn, which I just feel like is way more than I want to pay for plant fibers, for a commercially dyed plant fiber yarn, because there's so many more affordable alternatives. I mean, Barocco themselves have much more affordable alternatives. Lion Brand has more affordable alternatives. What's the other one? Cascade has more affordable alternatives. Even Sanduscar and Line, which is on the pricier side of a summer yarn, in my opinion, is more affordable than this yarn. And reason number two that I don't think I would repurchase this yarn is it's not machine washable. I feel like the large appeal for me for plant fibers, as opposed to picking like an animal fiber like wool, alpaca, mohair, A, it is cheaper, and two, it is easy care. And this doesn't really fall into either category. It's not machine washable, hand wash it and lay flat to dry, which I'm willing to do for my wool sweaters. For summer tank tops, I am not as willing. Plus, I feel like this is just, I haven't worn this that many times, but I feel like because this is sitting close to skin and right in the summer, when I'm getting hot and it's sweaty, I'm gonna need to wash this a lot more than I would a wool sweater. So it just seems like a little bit too high maintenance and a little bit too pricey of a yarn for me to personally repurchase. And I did use a little bit more than 2 balls of yarn. I didn't weigh how much I have left over in the third ball, but there is a lot left over. So if I were purchasing this yarn, this would have been a $75 tank top, which for a cotton viscose is more than I would like to pay for a project. One last thing, one other complaint. I wish there were more explicit instructions on the finishing touches of this top, because for example, like where the straps, where you pick up stitches for the straps and then like around the neckline, I have this weird gaping bit, which I really don't like the look of, and I didn't weave in all the ends, so probably after this podcast, I will go and figure out how I can sew in the ends that it kind of reinforces the strap, that the fabric is not pulling over there. Because even when I'm not wearing the top, like it's just laying flat and there's no like tension on it, there's still that gap, which just bothers me. So I wish there was more explicit instructions in the pattern on how to have a clean finish. So that is finished object number 1. Finished object number 2 is my self-drafted contiguous sleeve cardigan. I'm not going to talk about this one too much, only because most of my thoughts on this pattern are in the yoke, and I knit the yoke so long ago that that information is not really fresh in my brain. If you do want more like, oh my god, that motorcycle was so loud. If you do want more in-depth information on this sort of yoke construction, I recommend listening to my previous podcast, but I'll give like a brief overview. So I wanted a top-down cardigan with a contiguous sleeve construction, a double knit to button band, a higher sitting crew neck collar in a lighter weight, and I just wasn't finding something that fit the bill. So I decided to self-draft something, and I used this one pattern on Ravelry. I can't remember the pattern name off the top of my head. I will list it on the screen, but it's not a pattern, but rather it's an explanation and set of steps on how to create a contiguous sleeve construction. And I've knit a decent amount of contiguous sleeve sweaters before, and I never really understood why the construction worked. Like, I'm fairly certain the first time I knit the Terrazzo sweater, it was when I had been knitting for only a few months, and I remember I was so confused, like why there are so many different increase rates. Like, I'm increasing at one rate for the sleeves, one rate for the neckline, one rate for the body, and then I'm switching the increase rate at certain points, and it just completely threw me off. But after I read this pattern and after I have like wrote out the pattern basically for myself, now I understand why there's different increase rates in a contiguous sleeve construction. And I'm pretty sure I go more into depth in my previous podcast episode. So after that, whatchamacallit, after that, I just finished knitting the body, I finished knitting the sleeves, and I cut my steek open. And this time I did a crocheted steek reinforcement because I tried doing it with my sewing machine, but it just like wasn't picking up the fabric. I couldn't get the tension right. And honestly, the steek worked out pretty well. I haven't bought like any sort of ribbons or anything to cover up kind of like some of these straggly ends. I'm afraid of cutting them too close just because I know this is a rustic yarn. I know I did the crochet reinforcement and I have the button band as additional reinforcement, but part of me is still paranoid that it will unravel. So I've left like some of these straggly bits from my steek in the sweater. But overall, the crochet reinforcement was pretty easy. I do still prefer, I think, a machine sewn reinforcement, but because I couldn't get the tension right, I went to the crochet reinforcement and it totally works as well. I know some people also, when they use like these sort of super rustic yarns, they don't do any sort of reinforcement because the yarn just naturally felts together. And I am hoping that my steek also felts over time. Overall, I am happy with how it's fitting, but I think I would like to wear this a little bit more before I make my second version so that I know for certain what sort of fit modifications I would like to make. For instance, when I first finished this, I specifically made this in a way that I wanted the neckline to sit pretty high because I feel like all the cardigans that I've knit, the neckline just sits lower than I would like. I wanted this to be like a true crew neck. And I thought it was sitting too high, but then as I've worn it, I found that the neckline has relaxed. So we'll see. I think also for my next version, I will not knit it steeked. I will knit it flat so that way I can really, really nail down how I want the yoke to fit. And if it doesn't work out, I can frog it. Because that's the only downside with a steek. Once you cut the steek, you are kind of committed to the garment because otherwise, if you frog it, you will be left with a bunch of small strands of yarn, which is super annoying. As for the yarn for this project, I used Retrozaria Rosa Pomar Brusca. It ended up being quite an affordable project because I only bought 8 balls of yarn, which was incorrect of me to do because I thought 8 balls would be enough. Because when I knit my Ava cardigan, I think I bought 10 balls of this yarn and I ended up using less than 8. However, the Ava cardigan has a deep v-neck, so you are missing out a lot of the knitting in the yoke versus a crew neck, which is obviously going to eat up more yarn in the yoke because your whole chest area is covered. So I was playing Yarn Chicken, but that said, I bought the yarn for 40% off during the New Jersey Wool Walk. So like I said, this was a fairly affordable project. This yarn is very, very rustic. It's probably one of the most rustic yarns that I have used. I do remember that when I was knitting the Ava cardigan, I found it rustic, but I didn't find it as prickly. I think because it's still quite warm outside, I can feel the prickliness more. I'm hoping that as it cools down, I feel the prickliness less, because I did want this to be a cardigan that I can wear next to skin. I have worn it next to skin, but I feel like I still feel the prickliness on my arms a little bit. I would repurchase the yarn. However, I don't think I would repurchase this color because I wanted this to be a true black cardigan. I had to pick out so much vegetation from this yarn. Like, I literally had to go in with tweezers and pick out all like the little bits of hay and stuff. And I don't mind some vegetation in my yarn, but this had so much in it that when I took a picture of it as a whip at first, it literally looked like I was using a black and white speckled yarn. So for that reason, if I want to knit another true black garment, I would not buy the black in this sweater, because I wouldn't be surprised if over like the course of this project, I spent at least 2 hours going in with a tweezer and picking out the vegetation. And with that said, there's like still more vegetation left in the sweater. And like I said, I don't mind vegetation, but when it's so visible that it's literally changing the color of the yarn, that is just too excessive for me. So overall, happy with this project. We'll be wearing it a little bit more, and I hope to cast on a second version towards the end of the year. And then my last finished object is yet another cardigan. I am truly in my cardigan era. This is also one I cast on a long time ago. I cast it on all the way back in May. It is the J&P cardigan by Elbiana McLaughlin. This is another bottom-up construction cardigan, and this one is knit in all garter stitch. Don't really love bottom-up construction garments, don't really love garter stitch garments, but it just worked. Those two features, I think, just work in this pattern. I feel like the stripes give the garter stitch, like the stripes and the garter stitch work together, and that it looks like an interesting texture versus just a sort of blah garter stitch garment. And I don't really think I did much modifications to this pattern. So you start off the bottom, knit the body flat. It's garter stitch, so knitting flat is fine. Separate for the yoke. You do some short row shaping, which I think is done very, very cleanly. Like the stripes around the shoulder, I think look so good. The attention to detail in this pattern was excellent. Like you could really tell that the designer thought about like all the small finishing touches, which I really appreciate. You do some sort of seaming at the shoulders. It might be a 3-needle bind if I don't remember. And then you knit the sleeves, and there's instructions in the pattern to knit the sleeves flat as well as in the round. I decided to knit the sleeves flat because I'm not knitting garter stitch in the round. And then I seamed them up, and then that's where my game of yarn chicken hit me. I did knit the body significantly shorter than the pattern said, because I know that garter stitch tends to grow. Plus I'm quite short and I didn't really want a super long cardigan. And I'm glad that I did, because I have literally used up every single tiny little inch of this yarn. So my initial plan had been to do all the ribbing in brown, but during my second cuff, you can see I ran out of the brown yarn and I just finished the cuff in blue yarn. I thought about doing the same thing with the first sleeve, but I just let it be. And then I knit the button band, and then while I was knitting the button band, I ran out of yarn. Thankfully, I found my swatch and I was able to harvest enough yarn to finish the button band. And the collar is where you can really, really see my game of yarn chicken. So the collar is predominantly knit in the dark brown, but then you can see I ran out of the dark brown part of the way through, because then there's like I did partial row of blue yarn, a partial row of blue yarn, and then the bind off was all in the blue yarn until I literally ran out when I was a few stitches away. So I had to weave in one of my ends and cut out the brown yarn, and I finished the bind off in the brown yarn. because I didn't even have any yarn ends with the blue yarn that was long enough that I could weave it in and then cut it out to finish the bind off. So the collar is truly, truly scrappy, but honestly, I think it works with the vibe of the sweater, especially because I started off with these mismatched cuffs anyway. So the whole sweater kind of has a little bit of a scrappy finishing touch. Overall, I'm really, really happy with how the project turned out. I do still have to block it and finish weaving in all my ends. And I would totally knit this again. I could see myself knitting a fun, scrappy version. And I really just admire the designer's attention to detail. I have quite a few of her patterns in my pattern library, but this is the first one that I've actually ever knit, because I think I found it because I was thinking of knitting the Olga jacket, but then I decided to look through the patterns that I already had to see, like, do I need to buy a new pattern or do I already have something similar? And this fit the bill. And I'm really happy that I knit this. It took way longer than I was expecting, but I feel like my knitting just tends to slow down in the summer, which is totally cool. The project ended up quite heavy. It is basically like 600 grams of yarn, which for me, I feel like is quite heavy for a DK weight sweater. In comparison, this black cardigan, Blue Sky, is categorized as a worsted weight yarn, but personally I would say it's more a DK weight yarn. This sweater I used less than 8 balls, so this weighs less than 400 grams. And it has a double knit button band, which I feel like eats up more yarn. Versus this uses 600 grams of yarn. And I think it's because I held fingering weight held double. I have knit with fingering weight held with mohair and I enjoy that combination. I do not think I enjoy fingering weight held double. The fabric just ends up too dense and heavy for my liking, especially because I use 2 hand-dyed yarns. And I feel like hand-dyed yarns they usually use worsted spun bases. I think that's the correct one. Worsted spun bases are a little bit more heavier than woolen spun bases, which have more airiness to them. If I'm correct, please do correct me. I am very much a newbie when it comes to yarn construction. But yeah, I have learned that holding fingering weight double is not for me. It does give like a quite like structured and I don't know how I'm supposed to describe it. It's like it's quite a structured stitch, and I do think using the fingering weight held double in this garter stitch did give it more texture than if I had just used a single strand of DK weight. So in that sense, I guess it did work out nicely. I also did do a destash last month, and I destashed a lot of my hand-dyed yarn because I just realized hand-dyed yarn is beautiful, but at the end of the day, I think I just prefer knitting with commercially dyed yarns. Like, there was absolutely nothing wrong with either of these yarns. They had a lovely hand feel. They were dyed very nicely. The colors were beautiful, but I just think I prefer those woolier wools and the woolen spun yarns. I didn't even say what the bases were. So I used the blue yarn is Coast to Coast Yarn Co.'s natural sock base. It's 100% non-superwash merino. And then the brown yarn is Moondrake's Cormo fingering. So that's like a Corriedale merino blend or hybrid. I don't know. I just know Cormo means Corriedale plus merino. If I were to buy hand-dyed yarn, like wool yarn in the future, so no, let me rewind. If I'm buying hand-dyed yarn in the future, I still really like hand-dyed mohair and hand-dyed Surrey. I'm unsure if I will want to be buying sweater quantities of hand-dyed wool. I do still have some in my stash and I will be knitting that up, but I have since learned that perhaps hand-dyed wool is not for me. Also, these yarns were dyed pretty consistently, and also because I'm striping them, I didn't really have to worry about blending one skein to another. But I do remember the other few times I've tried knitting with hand-dyed wool, that's like another thing that's kind of annoying, that you have to do helical knitting to blend it in, and yeah, maybe it's just not for me. There are some exceptions, like some bases I still do really like, I really like when I've seen more and more hand dyers working with like farm yarns or local mill blends. I am interested in those bases, but just like regular merino blends don't interest me as much anymore. That's my spiel on that. And then my project cost for this will be on the screen. I used 3 skeins of each of the yarns. The Coast to Coast Yarn Co. I purchased during a pre-order, and then the Moondrake yarn I got for 50% off during the New Jersey Wool Walk in a previous year. And that's the end of my finished objects, but I do have more cardigans to talk about because 2 out of my 3 works in progress are cardigans. So let's get into those. I will talk about the one that I had already cast on during the previous podcast first. So the first of my whips is another self-drafted cardigan. However, this one has a hybrid drop shoulder slash contiguous, not contiguous, drop shoulder slash set in sleeve construction. So a traditional drop shoulder, the drop will start like further down your arm. However, if you are able to do some underarm shaping, you can raise where the drop shoulder starts, and then you do some short row shaping as a sleeve cap to kind of mimic the look of a set-in sleeve, and thus the drop shoulder slash set-in sleeve yoke is born. If you have ever knit sweater number 23, which I've knit thrice, it has that sort of construction. And there are like other popular patterns that have this same sort of construction. Once again, I have knitted a crew neck. I'm in the middle of the row, so that's why it may look a little bit funny, but hopefully you can still see what this cardigan is supposed to look like. With this one, I followed a pretty traditional schematic. So in my black cardigan, I knit it in such a way where the neckline is much higher than like all the other cardigans that I've knit before, and the standard the standard schematics for a neckline. Whereas for this cardigan, because after I knit that, I was like, I already kind of knew that maybe the neckline was a little bit too high. For this one, I followed a more standard neckline. And then for the sleeve, I decided to do a little bit of a balloon sleeve, a bishop sleeve. I knit straight, did a bunch of rapid decreases, and then knit some longish 2x2 rib before knitting one plain round and doing a bind off. I thought that I knit the sleeve really, really long because before I did my decreases, I was like, wow, this sleeve is like hitting like the top of my hand. And I knew I wanted a long rib, so I was afraid it would be too long. But as soon as I added in the rib, like the cinching just shortened the sleeve. So now I'm a little bit afraid that it is too short, but I also do not want to rip this out. So I'm hoping that it grows in blocking, but if not, I will probably just cut the sleeve somewhere and Kitchener it in because this is literally just plain stockinette with no decreases. I don't really have anything else to say on this project. It's just going as it's going. I knit on it occasionally because I don't really enjoy knitting flat all the time. I think next, after I finish up this leftover yarn, I'll probably start the next sleeve because I don't have any stockinette in the round projects at the moment. That's actually why I knit the first sleeve, because I needed a stockinette in the round project to go watch a movie. And then the yarn that I'm using for this project is Cardigan Woollia. I want to say it's a blood orange colorway. I have been obsessed with this colorway for over a year. I saw it at Knit in the London suburbs last summer and I really, really wanted it, but I was already buying a sweater quantity of yarn, and then I was visiting so many different yarn stores I didn't want to have to carry back 2 sweater quantities of yarn. And actually I had already purchased other sweater quantities of yarn and I hadn't got to Scotland at that point. So yeah, I wasn't able to buy this then, but then I was in Quebec earlier this summer and I visited Espace Tricot, and literally before I even went, I knew that I really wanted this yarn, and I'm so happy that I got it because I'm obsessed with this color. It's such a good, bright, like orangey red. It's the color that My Favorite Things Knitwear uses in her sample for cardigan number 9, I believe, the saddle shoulder construction. I haven't even looked at what the price of this yarn is post tariffs, but I think in general in the US, when I was looking at it earlier, it was like around $10 per ball. It might be more, it probably will be more now. And then when I bought it in Espace Tricot with including tax and the exchange, I think it ended up being around $7 USD per ball. Might have been a little less than $7 because I think I bought 10 balls and it cost me about $65 US with tax and conversion. So very happy with this. And whenever I go on vacation to Europe next, I totally want to buy more Cardigan yarns. I really, really want to buy their mohair because I also tried, like, I've touched it both in Quebec and when I was in Europe at a few yarn stores, and it feels so nice. And I feel like I've only heard people say good things about it. So that is this project. I don't really have a strict deadline for this project. I just work on it when I feel like it. And then I have one last cardigan on the needles, and it is a test knit. Okay. My last cardigan on the needles is the Maple Meadow cardigan by Meepy the Label. So this is another drop shoulder construction, knit top down. You start off knitting the back yoke, and then you pick up for the shoulders to shape the front yoke before you join all three pieces and you knit the body flat. I don't know how clearly you can see on the camera, but I did insert lifelines on this project because it includes lace and cables. So I'm pretty used to fixing cabling mistakes. However, I am a newbie at fixing lace mistakes because I don't really knit with a lot of lace. Actually, the only other lace garment that I have ever knit is from the same designer because I generally don't like the look of lace garments and I don't really find it enjoyable to knit, but I really, really like her designs with lace. This has these lace panels, and then you also have this one cable panel, and they join pretty cleanly at the shoulders. It might be hard to see because I am using a darker yarn, and then you have moss stitch along the sides. I thought that this would take me a lot longer to knit because I did cast it on quite a bit later than a lot of the test knitters, but so far it's honestly zooming along. I thought I was working on this very slowly, but this time last week I had just finished the yoke and now I have less than 1 inch left on the body before I start the ribbing. So overall the body only took me about a week to knit, which isn't that bad for something with lace because lace is not my forte. I think two things have made knitting the lace a little bit easier for me. I do the same thing when I'm knitting cable patterns in that I use different colored stitch markers and I will draw in colored lines on the chart and I will place the stitch markers at the same spot in the sweater. So for instance, if I have a pink stitch marker here on the chart, I will draw a pink line so that I can count like the number of stitches between those two colored lines and make sure that my stitches between those two same colored stitch markers align. I also finally decided to use lifelines. I like never use lifelines, but the Chiago needles and a lot of other needles, they have like a very handy little hole in the needle where you insert that little T-pin to tighten it up, but you can also thread in some sock yarn or thread, and when you knit the row, it automatically inserts the lifeline for you. So I've just been doing that with some scrap sock yarn because while I was knitting this yoke, I made so many mistakes. I made one mistake on the cable, which I had to drop down and fix 25 rows, and you are cabling pretty frequently. So that was a lot of cables that I had to fix. And then that wasn't that bad because I'm pretty used to fixing cables at this point. But then there were some spots where I had done the yarn over and decrease in the wrong spot. And it was really bothering me to the point where I had to fix it. But if you have ever tried to drop down and fix lace, it is such a pain in the butt because you are constantly yarn overing and decreasing. So when you are picking up stitches, if you are dropping down to a row where you did a yarn over, if you're not very, very careful, you may accidentally miss that stitch. So I decided to insert a lifeline on a row where I was purling. So that meant that I wasn't worried about having a piece of lifeline going through a yarn over because that just seemed like a headache. But I also had to make sure that I picked a row where I was not cabling on the next row because I'm not unsure how a lifeline would work if I was like twisting the stitches in the next row. And so far, thank God, actually, after I inserted the lifeline, I haven't had to fix any mistakes, but I'm leaving them in just in case I'm like knitting later on and I realize, oh crap, I have a mistake like 50 rows back or something. Then at least I can drop down the stitches to the lifeline and ensure that, okay, I haven't like dropped any stitches or anything like that. Because when I had made that mistake in the yoke, I literally had to frog like at least like 2 or 3 rows behind where the mistake was, because I was getting really confused how many stitches and like where I was picking up the stitches because of all those like yarn overs. All my mistakes aside, this has been a very, very enjoyable project. Usually when I'm knitting cardigans, it's that the knit rows zoom by and then the purl rows go a lot slower. But because I have to look at the chart when I'm knitting this, it's actually the knit rows which take longer. And then I'm oddly looking forward to the purl rows because I'm just purling and doing moss stitch. So I don't really have to like look at my knitting. I can just like do it and then read my book or watch whatever I'm watching while I am knitting this. Hopefully I will finish the body this weekend and I can start the sleeves, because my goal is to wear this to the New Jersey Sheep and Fiber Show. I don't know if it's going to be cold enough for it, but I would love to at least like take a picture of it there, because the yarn that I'm using I bought this yarn during last year's New Jersey Sheep and Fiber Festival. It is from Swayze Yarns and it is a 50% Jacob and 50% Rommeldale CVM worsted weight yarn, and the yardage on this is going so far. So I bought 5 balls of it. Each one is 4 ounces and has, I want to say, a little bit over 200 yards to it. And I'm still on my 3rd ball. I'm fairly certain I will finish up the entire body, including the ribbing and possibly like even the button band and the neckband with the 3 balls, which means usually when it comes to yarn consumption, I feel like the body takes up about 70% of the yarn consumption and the sleeves take about 30% or less. I think that each of the sleeves will take me less than 1 ball of yarn. So I do think I will have at least some yarn left over from this project, because that was kind of my hesitation of knitting a textured sweater pattern with some like limited edition yarn that I can't get again. Because with like a stockinette sweater, it's very easy to stop it early or like crop certain parts out. But when you are knitting a pattern, I think it looks weird if you do not stop in the right place. But so far, knock on wood, it looks like my yarn consumption is going nicely. This yarn feels really, really soft. Like it's not merino soft, but it's like, it just has a really nice hand feel. Like it's kind of like a lotiony soft. I don't know. I like it. And it doesn't have an overly, I should not have put that to my face. It doesn't have a overly strong sheepy smell. I can't tell if I have like more fiber on my face. Hopefully I do not. Hopefully I do not. And I honestly, on one hand, I want to say that I would buy more of this yarn, but on the other hand, there's so many different like sheepy yarns there, and maybe I want to try something new. I don't know. But if I don't buy it this year, I can always buy more next year. And I love this dark brown color. The fact that it came pre-wound, I think, is positive and negative. Positive because I didn't have to wind it myself, which is annoying. Negative because this yarn has been stored in cake form for a year. I definitely can see like some of the tension it's put on the yarn. And when I'm knitting it, parts of it do look thick and thin. There is a little bit of variation in the thickness of the yarn, but I think the like crimping from it being wound up for a year makes the thick and thinness look worse than it really is. Because when it's knit, I cannot tell that there is like any unevenness in the texture of the yarn, because the thick and thinness is like in reality so minor. It's just because of the way that it is tensioned in the cake, it looks like there's more unevenness than there really is. Okay, I have one last whip. I have cast on my first hat of the season, and it's just made me realize I really missed having like a small project on the needles. I haven't cast on a sock, I think, since I test knit a sock back in the spring. So it's been a while since I've had a small project, and I'm so looking forward to knitting some small projects again. And this actually also includes a yarn acquisition. So let's talk about the project first. I am knitting another 2x2 hat by Gagnon. I'm unsure how to pronounce her name. It looks really small, but like 2x2 rib stretches a lot. This is a free pattern. It is worked bottom up cast on any, it gives you a stitch count and a gauge, but it's such an easy pattern to modify to any gauge as long as you pick a stitch count that is divisible. I forget. It's divisible by 8, I think. I will write on the screen. Basically, you have to pick a number that is divisible by the decrease rate. So I think when you are shaping the crown, you are decreasing each row by 8 stitches. So as long as you pick a stitch count that is divisible by 8, you can knit this sweater at any gauge. I just looked at people who use DK weight yarns and like what kind of stitch counts they use, because I'm using a DK weight yarn and I picked that stitch count. I think I could have gone a little bit higher because I think this yarn is on the lighter side of a DK weight and you can see like how tiny it is looking, and I do have a big ass head. That said, it is super duper stretchy, and as you can see, I literally just did a plain long tail cast on and it still comfortably goes over my head. Hopefully my hair doesn't look too wacky. I have used up an entire ball of yarn so far. Oh, before I talk about the yarn, let me just finish talking about the pattern. And this pattern has the same crown shaping as the Hipster Hat by Petite Knit. So if you really love the look of that crown shaping, but you're looking for a free pattern alternative, totally would recommend this pattern. I have knit it before as a gift knit and it's a very enjoyable knit. And I really, really like knitting 2x2 rib as opposed to 1x1 rib. So the yarn that I am using for this is Malabrigo Caprini yarn. It is 80% superfine merino, 20% cashmere, 50 grams, has 164 yards. It says 24 stitches, 4 inches, which is in my mind like a fingering weight gauge. But then it says you can use US. No, I don't like US needle size. That throws me off. You can use anywhere from 3.5 to 4 millimeter needles, and I am using 3.5 millimeter needles. And this was a little bit of an impulse purchase. I was at the yarn store and the yarn was on sale and it was in my hand. So I purchased it and then I cast it on like that weekend, and it's been a very enjoyable knit. I have knit, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about like 8.5 inches so far. And my plan is to knit the hat, I think, to about 9 to 9.5 inches before doing the crown shaping, just because I have so much yarn. Like if one skein gets me to 8.5 inches, I definitely have more than enough to have the deep brim that I really want. And then whatever yarn that I have left over, I think I will make a matching pair of fingerless or convertible mittens. I am unsure. I'm not sure if this is the most flattering color on me. So I was never really somebody that really leaned into the whole color season theory because I just want to wear whatever colors I like. But my friends have recently really gotten into the color seasons, and then ergo I have been influenced into thinking a little bit more about color seasons. It's not gonna really influence me too much because, like I said, I wear the colors that I like and I'm happy with the way that I look in them. But it is making me side-eye this light pink a little bit because maybe it washes me out a little. I don't know. I like pink. The yarn feels nice. I will wear it even if it washes me out. Okay, that is a wrap on whips, and I guess a little bit of a start to acquisitions. I have one more. It's not even yarn acquisition, it is a thread acquisition. Let me grab it. So I have some crochet hooks to talk about as well as a thread, and then this yarn is not an acquisition, but I'll talk about it in a second. So I bought some Aunt Lydia's crochet thread, Classic 10, 100% cotton. So this is some like crochet thread that you can crochet some lace with. So I said in my late summer making plans video that I really, really want to fillet crochet something. So my initial plan had been to fillet crochet something with this Knitting for Olive cotton merino yarn, which is a fingering weight yarn, and I've had it in my stash for a few years at this point. I remember buying it at Brooklyn General Store. I do not remember what I purchased it for. So I thought that, okay, most fillet crochet patterns are written for like crochet thread, like this one I bought, but let me just try with the fingering weight yarn. So I bought 2 different crochet hook sizes. These are the tulip crochet hooks, and I bought a 3 millimeter crochet hook and a 3.25 millimeter crochet hook. And I started making a little swatch with the Knitting for Olive yarn with the 3.25 millimeter crochet hook. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm like, wow, this fingering weight yarn is looking kind of chunky. It's not giving me the delicacy that I wanted from this. So then I caved and I purchased this crochet thread because it's really inexpensive. I think I paid I paid less than $5 for this ball of thread from Michaels. And I tried crocheting a swatch with not the correct needle size. So this recommends a 1.5 millimeter crochet hook, but the smallest crochet hook I have is a 2.75 millimeter crochet hook, but I just wanted to give it a try. And wow, it was not very easy. It reminded me of why I found crochet so confusing before I learned how to do it, because it's really hard to read the stitches when they're so tiny and when you are also using the incorrect crochet hook size. The thing is, my Michaels and none of my local yarn stores carry any crochet hook sizes that are smaller than 2 millimeters. So I will have to order online the crochet hook size. But after I gave it a go, I'm kind of like unsure if I even want to jump into a full crochet hook if I want to jump into a full crochet project with this super thin, basically thread. So the plan is I'm going to have to adjust my plans. I think I'm going to have to find whatever needle size works best with this Knitting for Olive cotton merino. Did I say that I used a 3.25? No, I cast on with a 3 millimeter needle because I wanted to use the smallest millimeter size. And I was thinking it looks too crunchy. Not crunchy, too chunky. So my plan is to cast on a swatch with the 3.25 millimeter needle and hoping it looks a little less chunky. And I'm also going to adjust the sort of construction I wanted. So my initial plan was to crochet it's not an entire yoke in the sense of like a sweater yoke, but kind of like one triangle across and then 2 triangles for straps that I would then sew to some fabric to make a little dress. I'll try to insert a picture of either like a Ravelry project or a ready to wear piece that I was inspired by. But I'm amending that, and instead I'm going to just try filet crocheting with the fingering weight yarn, a straight rectangular piece, and that way I get practice in the technique with a yarn that is a little bit thicker rather than jumping straight into using crochet thread, because I am very, 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 very beginner level I am a very, very, very beginner level crocheter. I have only crocheted a blanket and I haven't even finished that project. And it's like on a 7 millimeter chunky crochet hook. So I don't have any experience with using finer gauge crochet hooks. My camera overheated, but I think I finished talking about this crochet project. So if it gets done or if it doesn't get done, we'll see what happens. So that's a wrap on this episode. Like I said, I haven't been sewing anything. I tried cutting out the fabric for 2 different projects and it didn't work out. And it just kind of left me paralyzed with my sewing because having this cut fabric that I know is not usable in the patterns that I wanted, it's just like a burden on me, and it's making me not want to cut out fabric for another project until I figure out how to use up this cut fabric. So I'll either have to get over this like mind block, or I will have to figure out a pattern to use this cut fabric with. I think I'm either going to try making a Sandra skirt or a skyline dress by Sydney Graham, but we'll see what happens. That's a wrap on the episode. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to give it a like and follow along for the next video. I'm unsure what the next video will be. I have like a few ideas percolating in my mind. I have been trying to film a project vlog as I knit the Mabel Meadow cardigan, and I thought about combining it with some footage of the New Jersey Sheep and Fiber Festival. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I had the same idea at the end of spring where I make a video reviewing all of the books that I read that season while knitting, but I don't know if that will happen or not. I've been thinking maybe I'll just try making it a short form video. If you're interested in seeing something like that, do let me know. As always, I would love to know what you are working on while watching this video, because I'm nosy and I want to know what's on other people's needles and I want to be influenced. Maybe I want to make the same thing you're making. And yes, that is truly it. Thank you again for watching. I hope to see you again next time. Happy knitting, happy making. Bye.